We want to get a start again talking about, not a start, but continue talking about different ways, two approaches, if you remember, to measuring gross domestic product. We've already talked about the expenditure approach. And in that particular case, in order to calculate GDP, we had consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net exports. There you go. It's all in one simple formula. Okay. The other way of measuring gross domestic product is not by measuring how much people spend, people in business and government and so forth, but measuring the income of the factors of production or productive resources. And so this is called the income approach to measuring real gross domestic product, or just gross domestic product. And I'll go through these in just a second, but it's wages plus rent plus interest plus profits That's the income, the categories of income. If you'll remember, I told you before there were 4 factors of production. I said there was land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. And so we've got those 4 factors of production, or 4 productive resources, and each one of those factors of production has a return or a payment, and we give them those names. And so, as I told you before, these are not necessarily how you would use the terms land. If you'll remember, I used natural resources such as air and water and the soil and so forth. But these terms aren't exactly the terms you might use in your everyday language, but nevertheless, economists put all productive resources into 4 categories. Well, then each one of those categories has a corresponding payment name. And so the payment to labor is wages, and the payment for land is rent, and the payment for capital is interest, the payment for entrepreneurship is profits. Okay? So that's really what we add up in order to find, and that's not the whole story, but that's the income approach to calculating gross domestic product. I believe what I started last time was we talked about this income approach. And I think I put up here, didn't I, compensation of employees. And that has 2 components, money wages and fringe benefits. So that compensation of employees is what I'm saying is the return to labor. Okay, all the money you get paid for working plus the fringe benefits you get. What kind of fringe benefits? Oh, things like hospitalization insurance, you know, or health insurance. If you get sick, you go to a hospital, then the insurance pays the bill. You might have some sick days. You might have some vacation time. There are legally mandated fringe benefits. You know, employers don't just pay fringes or not, depending on what they want to do, but they have to pay some fringe benefits. They have to pay, for example, into the state fund for unemployment compensation. And so, anyway, pensions, there would be another example. Your employer is paying into a pension for you. So anyway, these 2 things added together are total compensation of employees. The biggest share is money wages. And let me think. This is probably, and I'm just giving you a ballpark number, total compensation, maybe 70% more or less would be money wages, and 30% more or less would be fringe benefits. And that's just sort of a broad average, but you get the general idea. Okay? Questions about this? I won't talk about that much since most everybody's had a job at one point or another, and they're familiar with the money wages and familiar with the fringe benefits. One thing I will mention is that, I guess 2 things I'll mention. One of them is this. Your fringe benefits, your non-money fringe benefits, are not taxable. And that makes those pretty desirable. You know, if you earn $1's worth of wages, you might be in the, here's $1's worth of wages, and you're in the 25% tax bracket. You owe 25 cents in taxes. And so if you earn $1's worth of wages, you only end up with 75 cents after tax income. By the way, we call that disposable income. But anyway, 75 cents after tax. And so that tax is a lot. If you get fringe benefits worth $1 minus 0 taxes, you've got $1's worth of fringe benefits. And so what a lot of people do is if there's something that they were going to buy anyway, let's say health care insurance or health insurance, if they were going to buy health insurance anyway out of their money wages, then what they say is, well, gosh, in order to buy $1's worth of health care insurance, I've got to earn $1's worth of wages and I only have 75 cents. I've got to work another 1/3 of an hour, another 20 minutes in order to, or maybe actually a little bit more than that, but I got to work over an hour in order to pay for $1's worth of, or for $1. I've got to pay more than $1. It's not an hour's worth of work, but I've got to pay more than $1 in order to buy $1's worth of health insurance. But if my employer will buy health insurance for me, $1's worth just costs $1. I don't have to pay any taxes. That's a wonderful thing. So people like to tell their employers, yeah, we want those fringe benefits if it's something that everybody was going to buy anyway. Okay. A second thing I'll mention to you is this. A big cost, a big expense of fringe benefits is health insurance. That's a pretty big expense for employers, and that over the years, over the last couple of decades, has grown very rapidly. And so since it's grown rapidly, then fringe benefits have captured a growing share of total compensation. I'll give you a sort of a quick graph, and don't take anything here as exact. I'll put dollars here and time here, the year and so forth. And what I'm saying is this, is that money wages have sort of grown like that. Fringe benefits have grown like this, the cost of fringe benefits. And so here's F, and that being the case, total compensation is growing. This is a pretty bad graph, but total compensation is growing faster than wages, and fringe benefits are absorbing a growing share of total compensation. Okay, so anyway, this is, in recent years, this trend has, if not come to an end, at least slowed down. Healthcare costs have come under control as the country has switched to managed care and HMOs and PPOs and all these other institutions. They've been able to hold down, and not lower, but at least prevent the cost from rising as rapidly for this healthcare insurance. So anyway, who knows what the future is going to hold, but that's kind of a trend that we've observed in the past, is the fringe benefit costs rising more rapidly than wages. So maybe your pay, all things considered, your compensation, it maybe goes up 5%, your wages go up 2%, but the fringe benefit costs go up 7 or 8%. That's just an example. Okay, so let's go on. Number 2, the second component of this measure is what? Proprietor's income. Proprietor's income is one of these returns to entrepreneurs. A proprietor is a business owner. Okay? And so proprietor's income, I'm actually going to divide this profit thing into 2 categories, and one of them is the proprietor's income. So that is a profit measure, really. This is income earned by self-employed individuals, owners of unincorporated businesses. No, they have not incorporated. Owners of farms, well, a lot of farms, unincorporated farms, for example. So anyway, we're talking about those types of things. And this says income, but this is a profit. It's a return to the owners of businesses. Okay? A third category, corporate profits. That is another one of these returns to the entrepreneur. So it's really those 2 categories of proprietor's income and corporate profits. Those both add up to what I've called profits before. Corporate profits, that's the net income. You got all the revenues coming in from sales. You know, like let's say you've got a company, it sells $1 million worth of merchandise, so revenues coming in is $1 million, but then your company has to pay workers, has to pay the rent, has to pay for raw materials and so forth. So after you pay all those costs, maybe you've got $950,000 worth of costs going out. So at the end of the year, there's $1 million coming in, $950,000 going out. You've got $50,000 in corporate profits. Okay, so this is not the, I'm not saying here we're measuring the gross revenue coming into companies. This is the net amount they're left with after they pay their bills, after they pay their costs. What happens to these profits? Three things. Taxes, and of course this is corporate income tax. We all know about the personal income tax, but there's a corporate profits tax, or a corporate income tax. Some of these profits are paid out as dividends. Let me not just put these little bullets out here, but let me do this as a formula. Corporate profits equals taxes plus dividends, plus there's one other place these can go. They can be undistributed corporate profits. These things are also called retained earnings. So I'm saying all of the corporation's profits goes into one of those three things. The first thing is you got to pay the government, because they'll come out and get you if you don't. Then dividends, that's the part of the profits that the company shares with its shareholders, its owners. Undistributed corporate profits or retained earnings, that would be where a company earns a profit and they just don't give it to anybody, they keep it. Now why do they do that? And the answer is companies need cash in order to operate. They need financing. And by the way, there are courses in finance that tell you how, teach you the principles of financing a business. If, let's say, a company needs to build a new factory, where do they come up with the money for that? Well, that's what corporate finance is all about. You can come up with the money by issuing some stock in the company, and you can come up with money that way and pay for your new factory. Another way, you could go to the bank, take out a loan, borrow money, and build a factory with that borrowed money. Another way, issue some bonds and take the money that you receive from issuing bonds and build the factory with that. But another way, and a lot of companies do it, is you earn a profit in 1 year, and then in the next year, you use some of those profits to build your factory. You don't pay that out as dividends to anybody. You retain some earnings and just basically plow that back into the company. And so, anyway, I'm not trying to teach you about corporate finance, but I am saying that this is a part of corporate finance. This decision, after we pay our taxes, do we give all of our profits back to the owners? That decision takes into account what are our plans for the future. Are we trying to expand the company? Do we need to make some new investments? And if we do, it's cheaper for us to just, we've got the money in our hands, rather than paying out to somebody and then go to the bank and borrow. Why don't we just retain these profits and we'll plow that back into the company? Then we don't have to go to the bank and borrow. We're not going to be making a lot of interest payments, and we won't maybe run into financial difficulties down the road that way. So anyway, this decision as to how to split these profits up into dividends and retained earnings, that is an issue in corporate finance. Anyway, those two things added together, proprietor's income and corporate profits, those are the profits category here. So now we've got the payment to labor and the payment to the entrepreneurs. The other two categories, rental income of persons, erase a little bit, rental income of persons, now why of persons? Why not just rental income? And the answer is, well, like if a corporation had some rental income, let's say a corporation owned an apartment building and rented that apartment building and people paid rent. Why don't we put that rent right here? And the answer is because we already captured the rent that corporations get. We've already got that in corporate profits. We're talking about the rent that we haven't included anywhere else. This is income for basically not just houses. I mean, rent, we're used to thinking of that, but that would include rent on, like if I owned a house and rented it out, it would include that. If I owned a building and rented that out to somebody, let's say a warehouse, if I owned some farmland and rented that to somebody, it would count here. So anyway, renting all sorts of assets, the rent on those assets goes into this category. Here's something else that you maybe don't think would be in here, but it is. I think I sort of indirectly mentioned this the other day. There is an imputed, let me write down imputed, let me see how I've written this down here. Imputed value of owner-occupied homes. There we go. Imputed rent for owner-occupied homes. The other day when we were talking about investment spending, maybe you'll remember, maybe you have it in your notes, but when we were talking about investment spending the other day, I said, you know, well, or let me even back up. It's when we were talking about consumption spending. I said, if you go out and buy a house, build a home, it does not go in that C, consumption spending. You remember we had consumption of durables, non-durables, and services. I said that doesn't include housing, and the reason it doesn't include housing is if you build a home, we treat you as though you are a business owner and you've made an investment, and so we put that house in the investment category. We said you have made an investment. Well, okay, you're now the owner of a home, you're renting it, we pretend to yourself, and so now that's what we're talking about right here is you as the owner of the home, you've got rental income. You don't declare this on your taxes, but this is how the national income accounts show this, is that you're a business owner, you own a home, you rent it to you. And so then here is an imputed. An imputed just means there's not an actual rental payment made. It's not like you take $400 out of this pocket and put it over in that pocket and say, okay, now I paid the rent for the month, I feel a lot better. But it's if you were renting that house to somebody, how much would you receive for it? And so we impute a rental value for that house, and that's what we put in here. And these are owner-occupied homes. This is you're living in your own house, and we pretend in our national income accounts that you're renting that home. Okay? Questions about that? So that's not all this rental income of persons is. It's rent received. You remember I was telling you about land and buildings and homes, and then, but I'm saying it also includes an imputed value for rent on your own home that you're living in. And it also includes some other income that maybe you hadn't thought about before, some copyright royalties, and what else? Patent? Yeah, patent holders, their income. And you know, maybe you don't know about it, and maybe you do, but a patent or a copyright, those are kind of legal monopolies granted by the government. If you write something, or if you invent something, the government basically says you've got a right for a certain number of years to own this exclusively. If I write a book, it's my book. You can't go and Xerox it and or copy it, I should say, and sell that to other people. It's mine. I hold the copyright on it. And for, I don't know how many years, 25 or years or longer, but you can't do that. And then I get royalties from that. When some publisher publishes this book, they send me a check, and or if it was I invented something, they would send me checks for using my patent. If I invented something like blue salt. I hope nobody gets that. I hope the word doesn't get out. Anyway, you get the idea on those. So, and why do we include those under rental income? And the answer is, I've got an asset. The asset is, I got this book or I got this invention, but I've got an asset and I'm renting it to somebody. Just like the publisher or the manufacturer, just like if I had some land and I rented that to somebody. So it's, you know, there's not any real unique idea there. It just, probably you and I, in my everyday language, I'm not used to thinking about rent and then start talking about royalties on copyrights. But still, we have to put all these resources into a category, one or another, and so we've taken this copyrights and patents, and we put those into the category of, that is, what is it here? It's like land, and then we're talking about the return on that, we're calling it rent. Okay? And the final category that we need to consider is net interest. This is net interest received by households and government. Interest received by households and government minus the interest they paid. They who? They households and they government. No, it's not they government, it's them government. Anyway, it's those two groups. The business sector, we have already captured the interest they pay and receive. That's already been taken into account up here when we talked about corporate profits and proprietor's income. Like, for example, if a bank lends money and the bank receives interest, well, that bank is a corporation, and that interest went into their profit statement. And so we already know about the interest that businesses are involved in up here, the interest they're paying and receiving. So all we're doing now is we're coming down here into a separate category, the households and the governments. Interest received by the government, well, state and local governments receive a little bit of interest, perhaps, but you know, the national government in Washington, they've got a debt, and you guys have all heard about the national debt, and you should have heard about it if you didn't, because you're going to be paying the interest on the national debt for the rest of your life. But the national debt is over. It's about $5.5 trillion. It's actually a little more than that, but about $5.5 trillion. And if you think about let's say the interest rate on the national debt, let's just take a pretty low interest rate. Let's say it's 5%. If the interest rate's 5% on $5.5 trillion, let's see if I can do this in my head, then what that would mean is the government would have to pay $275 billion a year in interest. That's the national government of Washington. So anyway, where we say interest received by households and government, well, there's one government that doesn't receive, it pays $275 billion in interest a year, more or less. Now, other governments, state and local, they receive a little bit of interest, partly because state and local governments are managing the pensions of their employees. I work for the state of Missouri. State of Missouri puts a little bit of money away every month for me. I think it's about $50 a month, if I'm not mistaken. But they put a little bit of money away every month for me, and then where do they put that? And the answer is they invest it, stocks and bonds and things like that. And that being the case, then the state of Missouri is going to have a little bit of interest income. Most of this interest income is received by households, individuals like us. Not that there are individuals like us, but individuals nevertheless. So anyway, let me get my survey of current business out and see I have these numbers and see if I can't just kind of write a few of these down here. Compensation of employees. Let's see, 4410 billion. That's $4,410 billion. Oh, that's not the right number. I'm sorry. That was the wrong year. I'll do better next time. Let's try 5010. Hey, 5010 billion. About $5 trillion is compensation of employees. How many employees are we talking about? Well, if you remember a few days ago, we were in here and talking about what's the labor force, how many people are employed, how many are unemployed, and I think we said that there were, what, 130 million more or less people that are working, so there'd be about 130 million people sharing in this $5.01 trillion. Anyway, compensation of employees, and that does include fringes as well as wages and salaries. I don't have all that broken down here. What do we have next? Proprietor's income, $576 billion. $576 billion. Corporate profits, $825 billion. Not bad, huh? Rental income of persons, $164 billion. And then net interest, $450 billion. What's the largest component of this total? Oh, and I didn't tell you the total, did I? What's the largest component? Well, it's not even a close race, is it? Compensation of employees is by far the greatest. This total was, you know, if you add all these up, 7,030. I was rounding off as I went along, so these may not add up exactly, but pretty close. A little over $7 trillion. Yes, sir? Do you need to know these? You mean these numbers? I don't know them unless I turn around. So no, you don't need to know these for the test. I mean, I don't remember one of them right now, other than the last thing I remember saying is $7 trillion. So I'm going to say that number at the top has got a 7 to begin. But no, you don't need to memorize those. I want you to have an idea about the magnitudes, what we're talking about here, rather than memorizing numbers. Do you need to know these? Yeah, I think so. I will mention to you before I go on that usually when economists are getting to gross domestic product, usually they take this approach. Usually not this approach. Okay, but anyway, the expenditure approach is most common. So if I had a certain amount of brain power and had to divide it between these two approaches, then I'd probably put more brain power on the expenditure approach. Right? There's an opportunity cost to learning this. You may not learn this as well. I just thought I'd throw opportunity cost into the discussion. So anyway, if we add all, well, and we did add all these things up, and we had this number at the top, this thing at the top is not gross domestic product. It's called national income. And then we have to make a few adjustments to national income to get to gross domestic product. Okay? National income is the income of factors of production. Or if you like the term more, the income of productive resources. And so what I told you is there's two different ways of measuring GDP. We're not quite there yet. We've gotten to national income. We know the income of the factors of production, but there's a few other adjustments that need to be made, and that's the going from national income to GDP. Okay? There's this plus a few other things I'm saying, and that's what we're getting ready to add, those few other things. Okay? Number one, national income plus capital consumption allowance. Capital consumption allowance, you know, another term for that, which most people are familiar with, is depreciation. Here's what this is. You know, when you're producing things during the year, certain capital goods wear out. Right? We've talked about capital goods, the tools and equipment, and machinery and factories and warehouses, and all those non-human resources, not nature because they've been transformed. They're not from nature directly, but they are still non-human resources. That's capital goods, and those capital goods wear out during the year. And so we've got national income plus the value of capital that wears out during the year. Okay? This is one of the costs or expenses that businesses bear, but it's not paid to a factor owner. That is to say, if a company comes along and let's say rents capital equipment for you or borrows it from you, I should say, then they have to pay you for that, but they also have to maintain the capital when they give it back to you. And so that's what we're saying here is there's an expense that businesses bear, and yet it doesn't show up as an income of households. It's not part of their rent. Okay? A second category or a second thing that we add in, indirect business taxes. Now this term indirect is probably a little bit unfamiliar to you, but direct taxes are like income taxes in the terminology they're using here. Indirect business taxes are mainly mainly sales, excise, and property taxes. Almost entirely. You may want to abbreviate this IBT because there's nothing else that sounds like IBT, so once you put it there, then you've got it. Okay, now at this point, and then we're going to go on a little bit more, national income plus capital consumption allowance plus indirect business taxes, that is the old gross national product. That used to be everybody would talk about, as that was the broadest measure of economic activity in the United States, was gross national product. And so that was national income plus capital consumption plus indirect business taxes, GNP. Still a lot of people use that term GNP, but GDP is the thing that is really in vogue now and probably will be for the indefinite future, years and years. What else would there be? Maybe some kind of a gross product measure for the solar system or something like that. Maybe something will replace this once we have, you know, like production taking place on the moon and Mars and things like that. But as long as we're sort of, you know, the world's hooked up the way it is right now, probably gross domestic product is the measure that we'll have for many, many years to come. Then we make two more adjustments to GNP to get to GDP. One of those adjustments is factor income, oh, we have to subtract, from GNP, subtract income earned by U.S. factors of production from the rest of the world. And then we need to add income earned by foreign factors of production from the U.S. These numbers, the positive and negative, they're about the same size. Not exactly, but they're within, I wonder if I have any numbers that'll tell me this. I started to shoot a number out there like $50 billion, but I better not do that. Oh, I just did. Well, what do we have here? Here we go. I show these numbers as being, let me see here, just one second. $20 billion apart. So what I'm saying is this is a pretty big number, and this is a pretty big number, but one's got a negative and one's got a positive. They offset each other, and I'm saying they're within $20 billion of each other. And since these are within $20 billion of each other, I'm saying GNP and then GDP, and that's where we are here, is GNP minus something plus something is equal to GDP. I'm saying there's only about $20 to $30 billion difference between these two, because the United States earns about the United States factors of production earn about the same amount overseas as foreign factors of production earn from the United States. Now, why do we have to do this? And if you'll remember, what I was telling you is gross national product is a measure of all of the value of production by U.S.-owned factors of production, no matter where they are. So if I'm working overseas, it would be difficult to be in this classroom. But if I was working overseas, I'd have some income, and it would go into gross national product, but it would not go into gross domestic product, because that's production of production within the United States. So anyway, we're going from who owns the factors of production to a geographic measure, and so then we have to start talking about the cross-border types of income. And so anyway, that's what these two adjustments are, is the cross-border. I go outside the country and earn income, we subtract it out. A foreigner comes into the United States and earns income, we add it in, and so then we go from GNP to GDP. Don't mean to confuse you with that. It is a small number. By the way, if this were a small number for everybody, we'd probably just ignore it and say, it's so small, who cares? But, and this is, $20 or $30 billion is a lot for me or you or Springfield, but it's a tiny amount for the United States. Most foreign countries aren't as big as the United States. If you take Western Europe, you know, it's divided up, or just Europe I should say, it's divided up into like 15 or 20 countries, and they all trade with each other, and they cross those borders. Crossing, you know, like from Germany into Holland is sort of like going from here into Kansas or something like that. And so there's a lot of that cross-border traffic. Same thing is true in many other countries. And when there's a lot of cross-border traffic, then these numbers themselves are huge, and they may not be very much offsetting. So what I'm saying to you is that for most countries of the world, these two numbers don't offset each other. But for the United States, GNP and GDP are pretty close together. So let's go back. We take these items right here, the income of factors of production. To those items, we add the capital consumption and the indirect business taxes, and that gets us to GNP. And then we take into account the cross-border income, and that gets us to GDP. And now you can see why I was telling you is, well, we've got two approaches to measuring GDP. One of them is C plus I plus G plus net exports, and we're done. And the other one is, well, we add up those 5 things, and then we add 2 more, and then we add another one, and then we subtract one, and it kind of gets to be a long list. Here's what you do not have to do. You do not have to know all those little items that come in underneath of each one of these things. You need to know basically what these things represent. You for sure don't need to know all the numbers. Let's spend the rest of the hour talking about, I've just used the term gross domestic product. I better do a little erasing. I want to talk about the difference between real gross domestic product and nominal gross domestic product. This is a pretty important topic. It's not all that hard to understand, not all that hard to sort of work with, but it's important that you have this understanding. Now, let me, before I sort of get technical with you, let me just give you a kind of a common sense way of looking at this. When we talk about real gross domestic product, we're interested, that word real, what it means to economists is this. We're interested really in the physical part of production. How many cars do we produce? How many haircuts are given? But more, not so much dollars. We're going to put a dollar sign on this, but what we're really trying to get a grasp of when we talk about real GDP is the sort of, here's the amount, the quantities of goods that we're producing. And when we get to nominal GDP, it's more of a dollar measure. And so let me give you an example where this is important, if we have inflation. Let's say that in this year, our gross domestic product, right now, this year, let's say it was $8 trillion. And let's say that, you know, whatever we produce this year, we produce exactly the same quantities of haircuts or cars or suits or basketballs or every single good, just hypothetically, every single good we produce exactly the same quantity next year. If that happened, then our real gross domestic product would not change. From one year to the next, we produce the same basket of goods and services, our real gross domestic product would not change. However, let's assume something else happens. From this year to next year, prices go up by 10%. Now, we're still producing the same number of haircuts, but the haircut which was $5, let's say, now it's $5.50. Then what's happened is this. even though our real gross domestic product would be unchanged because we're producing the same quantities of goods and services, even though that's unchanged, our nominal gross domestic product, just the dollar value of that, it would go up by 10%. Now, which one of these is important? And the answer is they're both important. We want to know what's the total dollar value of everything produced and sold. Yes, we do. But we also want to say, you know, if prices hadn't gone up, then what would have happened to the economy? And that's what is going to tell us about, or what we're going to learn about GDP. Let me give you a problem here. Or I won't give you a problem, I'll give me a problem. But let's say goods, and we'll just start off with goods A, B, C, D, E. 5 goods. And let's say the quantity in year 1, we'll just put some numbers in here, 10, 20, 30, 20, 10. Where did I get those? Made them up. Well, I didn't actually make them up. I learned those in grade school, but I was the one who decided to use them in this context. Price in year 1. Let's say $1, $2, well, $1, $2, $3. P times Q in year 1. We're pretending right now, this is all the goods in the United States, all the goods in the United States, and this is all the quantities that we're able to produce in year 1. And this is the prices of those goods. Well, let's just go through here. $10 times 10 units, I'm sorry, times $1 each, that's $10. 20 units times $2 is 40. 30 times 1 is 30. 20 times 2, 40. 10 times 3, 30. This is all the goods we produce times their prices. Now think about GDP. GDP is the market value of all final goods and services produced in the United States within a year. Well, the market value is, here's the market value of the production. So P times Q, this is gross domestic product if we add it up. Gross domestic product for year 1. 10, 50, 80, 120, 150. I hope my math is right. Equals GDP for year 1. Okay. Let's talk about year 2. Quantity. Year 2. And then I'll say prices in year 2. Yes?
Is that real gross domestic product or nominal?
Is it real or nominal? Right now we've only got the one, and I'll tell you in a minute. So, but there's no way to know right now. Right now, well, it's nominal for sure, but I'll talk about real here in a minute. Okay? Let's make up some different quantities. We don't want exactly the same quantities. Well, let's say here's 15 units of good A. Let's say good B, we produce, let's produce 15 units of good B. Good C, let's produce 25 units. D, boy, these, I wish I'd drawn this on a straight line going across. D, let's make that 25 units. And E, let's make that 10 units again. By the way, here's what I did not do. Can't do this. Well, you can do it, but it'd be wrong. 10 plus 20 is 30, 60, 80, 90. I did not add that up, those quantities. These are different things. We've all heard that whole thing about you know, you can't add apples to oranges, and that's what that would be, is adding that up. Don't do that. We have to put a market value on it. That's what this is doing. Prices. Let's let all the prices be just $2. And now we'll take P times Q. Boy, there's not much space for this. P times Q. And we'll put it right here. 15 times 2 is 30. 15 times, 30, 50, 50, 20, 60, 160, 180. So here is GDP in year 2. I'll still get there for you. How much did GDP go up? Well, it went up by $30 in this particular case, from 150 to 180. What percent did GDP go up? Well, what do we have here? 30 is the increase, the percentage change is equal to this. 30 is the gain divided by, it started off at 150, so this is equal to a 20% increase. This is a 20% increase in nominal GDP. The total market value of all goods and services produced in this country that we've made up here, it went up by 20%. How much of that was real? That is to say, how much did we actually produce more? We can compare this quantity to these quantities here. How much was actual increase in production of this $30? How much of that was real quantity increase in production, and how much it was just, well, prices went up. And we can see some prices went up from $1 to $2, $1 to $2. Here's two prices that did not change. Here's one that went down. How much of this $30 gain was due to inflation? How much of it was due to real production? That's what we're going to talk about next time. So long. Well, I wanted to spend a couple minutes here now that class is over. You've seen me hold up these magazines and kind of read some numbers from them, and I thought I'd familiarize you a little bit with it. If someday you'd like to have a little bit of information on how the economy is performing, you may have some use for these magazines. The three, I'll just kind of mention the titles to you: Survey of Current Business, and there's a second one, CPI Detailed Report, and the third is the Monthly Labor Review. And I've been using those for my data during the last few class periods. All three of these are over in the government documents section of the library. There's a librarian there that will be happy to help you. And usually they keep these magazines up near their front desk. So anyway, feel free to go over there. Survey of Current Business is distributed by the Commerce Department, and the main thing that it does, it has a variety of reports, but the main thing that it does is talks about the gross domestic product accounts. And they have gross domestic product figures both for right now and then going back for many years in the past. And then it also has the gross domestic product numbers broken down by smaller category: consumption, investment, and government spending, and net exports, and so forth. So that's something that I'll mention that you may want to look at every once in a while. All three of these are monthly magazines. And the Survey of Current Business, the page I just opened here, it's got gross state product. So it also shows the contribution of individual states, or each state, to the total. Let's see if I can see this number here. Missouri's gross state product, the total for the United States, about $7.6 trillion. That'd be gross domestic product. But then for Missouri, 140, what's it say, $5 billion. So in general, and this is just kind of a rule of thumb you may want to remember, Missouri is about average in terms of the size of its economy. And so average would be, since we have 50 states, the average state would account for about 2% of GDP. And so Missouri's gross state product accounts for about 2% of the nation's gross domestic product. So anyway, that's what I'm telling you. CPI Detailed Report. You probably heard me a couple days ago there go through and talk about all these different varieties of meat: ground chuck, ground beef, chuck roast, round roast, rib roast, steak, T-bone, and so forth. It certainly has the entire market basket in here and shows the prices over the years. Second thing I see here is the historical consumer price index. It shows it, this goes from 1960 up until the present, and then it just shows it month by month. Let's see what else I have marked here. This is just what I'm looking at right now. It shows consumer price index for a particular month, and then just shows the major categories of food and beverages, housing, apparel and upkeep, transportation, medical care, entertainment, and so forth. So you see the broad categories of consumer price index, and of course then each one of those broad categories is broken down into many smaller categories. The third thing I was going to mention is the monthly labor review. The monthly labor review shows, guess what, labor market conditions. And I was mentioning the other day some of these numbers about the civilian non-institutional population age 16 and over, a little bit over 200 million people, about 210 million. Civilian labor force, 136 million, and so forth. We were kind of talking about those numbers. That's where I found that. Here's another page that shows me the unemployment, total number of people unemployed, and then the unemployment rate, what percent of the labor force is unemployed. And then what I'm also looking at here is a table that shows unemployment rates by sex and age. And so what we could do is we could find the unemployment rate for men 16 and older, or men age 16 to 24. And it breaks it down into some pretty fine categories. Let me kind of read a couple numbers for you here and you can do a comparison. The unemployment rate for all men 16 and older, this was back in 1997, so that's an old number, but men 16 and over, it was 4.9%. Now, that's basically all men. Let's look at the unemployment rate for men 16 to 17 years old. It's 19.1%, same year. So the unemployment rate is almost 4 times as high for men 16 and 17 years old as it is for all men. And so teenagers have a difficult time finding work, it seems, since the unemployment rate's high. Why is that? And the answer is we have a minimum wage, and we talked about that in class. Teenagers, 16, 17 years old, they're unskilled workers, and so when we have a minimum wage, we price unskilled workers out of the market. And that's why their unemployment rate's high. On the other hand, people who are 30, 40, 50 years old, most all of them have passed the unskilled status, or and have certain skills and experience, and so their unemployment rate's going to be much lower. Anyway, what we'll do later is we'll come back and look at these same sources of information on the internet, and we'll kind of see, what you would find if you went onto the internet to find some economic data. But that's the things that you can find right here on campus over in the government document section of the library.